This awareness through movement lesson in the Feldenkrais Method focuses on breathing and posture. One way to measure the quality of our posture is how easily we move from standing still. Posture is not static because we are always adjusting our balance. So even when we're standing still, there is a subtle movement. You will be lying on the floor for this lesson, so it is best to have something padded to lie on, such as a rug or exercise mat. Take off your shoes and your glasses. Since this is a movement lesson, wearing loose clothes will help. Finally, if you feel fatigue or discomfort, give yourself permission to rest. So you're lying on your back and just notice your contact with the floor. And sense how your head is on the floor, whether it's tilted back or forward. And how much space is behind your neck, between your neck and the floor. And how your spine begins to meet the floor. Is it close to where your seventh cervical is, your first thoracic vertebra? And if you don't know what that is, you can just kind of run your hand back behind your neck, and the first big bump, if you tilt your head forward, the first big bump is your seventh cervical, and the bump below that is your first thoracic vertebra. So notice the distance between your first thoracic vertebra and the floor. So we can get very, very detailed in our observations down to individual vertebra and individual ribs. So just continue sensing how you rest on the floor. So you sense where on the ribs you're resting on the floor. Your right side, your left side might be different. You might have more contact. And at what point do you feel that your ribs leave the floor? Or if they do, you might be flat on the floor and you're in contact with the floor. But there might be a place where you feel your ribs and your vertebra begin to come off the floor. And the small of your back, the lumbar region of your back, what in Hebrew is called the vertebra of the pelvis. And so sense that. You might even check that with your hand, and then feel how your pelvis is resting on the floor. Is it tilted forward, tilted back? And notice your breath. Where does your breath go? Where do you feel your breath in the front, in your abdomen, in your lower abdomen, below your navel? And Do you feel it in your upper ribs? Do you feel it between your shoulders on the floor? In the mid part of your back where your ribs are resting, and the small of your back? Do you feel movement there? And then let that go. Now in this lesson, we're going to do this lesson as if you were standing. So your head would not be all the way back on the floor like this. If you were to stand against a wall, for example, your head would probably not touch the wall if your back was against the wall. So in a sense, if you imagine the floor here as a wall, where would you place your head so that it would be like standing? So that your head is a little bit elevated. You might want to have it more. You can put a book on the floor. That's nice. You can put a towel on a book or a towel. But you want to elevate your head a little bit. And now bend your knees so the soles of your feet are on the floor. And you're going to do a movement with your head like this, where you bring your chin, you're going to tilt your head forward so that your chin comes a little bit closer to your sternum. You're not going to lift it, you're just going to rock it forward a little bit. You're going to just tilt your head forward a little bit. And notice how much of you participates in that movement. Do you feel it in your neck? Do you feel it between your shoulders and farther down your spine? Who knows? And then let that go. And then tilt your head back, so as if you were going to look a little bit toward the wall. And that doesn't have to be a big movement, just a little bit, and then come back. So you tilt your head and you come back. So it's just a little bit of movement that you're doing in your head. And you're just seeing, how do you feel that movement further down your spine? What participates in that movement beside your neck, in addition to your neck? And you do that a few times and then rest. Lengthen your legs and rest. Oops. And now, bend your knees so the soles of your feet are on the floor. And this time you're going to tilt your pelvis so that your lower back gets closer to the floor. You're going to tilt your pelvis back. And then you're going to come back to neutral. You're going to tilt your pelvis back and then come back to neutral. So you're going to lower your lumbar vertebra closer to the floor. Not powerfully, just a little bit. You'll find in this lesson particularly, but other lessons also, that if you do less, you get more result. So you tilt your pelvis and you come back. And what do you feel in your contact with the floor and your ribs when you do that? And what do you feel happens in your spine, for example, where your ribs are or between your shoulders? You may not feel something, you may feel something. But notice if you feel something there. And then let that go and extend your legs. And now bend your knees again and put the soles of your feet on the floor. And this time, tilt your pelvis so that your lumbar vertebrae go away from the floor. Not powerfully, not to the limit that you can do that. Just do a little bit so you just feel the lumbar lift a little bit from the floor. So how is it that you do this? How is it that your pelvis tilts forward? What is tilting your pelvis forward? And notice if you begin to feel any movement in your head when you do this. Maybe your head slides down a little bit. Maybe your head rocks forward a little bit. And notice if you do the movement with a tight jaw, is your jaw shut a little bit? So open your mouth a little bit when you do this, just a little bit, so it's just soft. So your jaw's soft. And also notice whether you tend to breathe in or whether you tend to breathe out when you tilt your pelvis forward and your small of your back lifts from the floor. And only do enough movement that you notice something. Just do a little bit of movement. Micro movement. And then let that go and rest. Lower your legs. And then bend your knees again. And now, tilt your pelvis back so that your head might slide up a little bit toward the wall. And maybe your chin moves away from your sternum. So you tilt your pelvis back and your head rocks back. If you were to do this in a way that you were doing something intentionally with your head would probably do something other than rock back. So you do it and then you come back. So you tilt your pelvis a little bit and then you bring it back. So you don't hold the position. And you may or may not feel anything in your head. That's not required. But you might, and you might also feel something between your shoulders of how your spine will slide up between your shoulders. And then pause for a moment. Let that go. And now do a movement where you tilt your pelvis forward a little bit, and then you tilt your pelvis back so that your spine is moving with your pelvis, is moving up and down. And maybe you feel this sliding between your shoulders. And your head will rock a little bit back and a little bit forward with your pelvis. And then let that go. Extend your legs and rest. Feel your contact with the floor now. Maybe it's changed, shifted a little bit. And now bend your knees so the soles of your feet are on the floor. And just notice your breath. Notice what moves in your ribs. In the front, in the back, in the sides. And tilt your pelvis back so your head tilts back a little bit. And notice, and leave it there. And notice what changes in your breath. Does this inhibit or free your breath in any particular way? And then let that go, bring your pelvis back. And then continue tilting the pelvis in a movement that you tilt the pelvis back, bring the lumbar vertebra closer to the floor, and then go back to neutral. And go back to that movement. And notice if you're inhaling or exhaling as you do that movement. And as you do the movement, inhale. As you tilt your pelvis back, inhale. And where do you feel that movement goes in your breath? Maybe you feel a change in your upper ribs. Maybe you feel a change behind on your back. And then stop that movement and tilt your pelvis forward. As you inhale. And where does your breath go? So you tilt your pelvis and then you bring it back. And do you feel your breath move in different places than when you tilt your pelvis back. And then let that go and extend your legs and rest. And now bend your knees again. And tilt your pelvis back. And as you do that, tilt your head back too. And do this in a way so that you expand that movement a little bit. In other words, you exaggerate the movement in your head. So you tilt your pelvis back and you tilt your head back while you do that. And then you come back to neutral. Neutral is your resting place. So you tilt your pelvis back and you tilt your head back. And by the way, are you doing this with your eyes closed or with your eyes open? So open your eyes and look up a little bit toward the wall as your head tilts back. And do you tend to exhale or inhale while you do this? Allow your breath to go out as you tilt your pelvis back and tilt your head back. So you're timing the movement with your breath. So you exhale as you tilt back, and then you inhale as you come back. And then pause for a moment. Then tilt your pelvis forward as you tilt your head forward, and exaggerate that movement a little bit. And do this movement as you inhale. This may feel very comfortable to do because you may have a tendency to do this anyway. So let go of intentionally inhaling and just tilt your pelvis forward and tilt your head forward, and just notice what you tend to do with your breathing. And begin to tilt your pelvis forward and tilt your head forward as you inhale, and then as you exhale, tilt your pelvis back and tilt your head back. And then let that go. Extend your legs and rest. Feel the contact you have with the floor and notice your breath. Now come back with the soles of your feet on the floor. And this time, as you rock your pelvis forward and your head forward and your pelvis back and your head back, reverse your breathing so that you exhale as you tilt your pelvis forward and you inhale as you tilt it back. And notice where your breath goes. Do you feel any movement in your upper ribs? Do you feel the breath move in your lumbar vertebra, the lower back? Do you feel any expansion in your sternum? And then begin to do the movement quicker and lighter, and separate any particular pattern of breathing from the movement. Just rock back and forth. Chum, chum, chum. Back and forth. Chum, 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 chum. Lightly, quickly back and forth. Light and quick. And notice how there's a movement in your spine between your shoulders. In a sense, you're moving your whole body around, up and down between your shoulders. But if you make it light and quick, up, down, up, down, up, down. Make it really light and quick so you're not trying to do it carefully or purposefully. So if you make it very casual and don't try to do it well, you can lighten it up. Especially if you divorce it from your breath, because we don't breathe like this unless we're really working hard. And then let go of that movement. And this time, as you come down with your pelvis, look up with your head and your eyes. Up would be in relation to you, so it would be toward the wall. And most instructions, when I'm giving them of up, down, left, right, forward or back, will all be in the relationship of how you are in the room. Unless I say up toward the ceiling. So you tilt your pelvis forward and you rock your head back. It's the opposite of what we've been doing. You tilt your pelvis forward and rock your head back. So in a sense, you're going into an extension. Your whole body is going to extension. But reduce the movement so that it's only a small micro movement. When we do small micro movements, then the body has a chance to sense the movement through the spine, through the skeletal structure, through your skeletal structure. So reduce the movement. Do half of whatever you're doing. Half. Do less. Everyone go to their limit of what they think they can do. Go to your limit of how far the movement will go. And then do 1/4 of that or 1/8 of that. A small fraction of that is all that's needed. And do it in a way that movement comes out of your imagination. So you imagine the movement. You imagine what it looks like. And then you begin to do the movement out of your imagination. Very gently, slowly. Your imagination expands into the movement. When movement becomes easy, we don't sense the movement, we do the movement. So in this movement, we get longer in our front and shorter in our back. A nice way to look at it is that your chin and your pubic bone go away from each other. You're getting longer in the front of your torso. You're letting go of any holding there. So do it simply. Do it in a way that this movement is one simple movement, not a head, pelvis, spine movement, or a head, pelvis, spine, rib movement. And it doesn't matter if it's just 1/8 of an inch. And by the way, what do you tend to do with your breath? Do you tend to inhale when you do this, or do you tend to exhale? So whatever your tendency is to do the opposite with your breath. And then let that go. Extend your legs and rest. Notice where your movement is when you breathe. Maybe it's higher or lower. Or maybe your contact on the floor has changed. Bend your knees so the soles of your feet are on the floor. And this time when you tilt, you're going to tilt your pelvis back. You're going to tilt your head forward. So your pelvis tilts in a way that your small of your back gets closer to the floor. So you bring the small of your back closer to the floor. So you can think of this as a movement in the vertebra of the pelvis. In other words, you can just bring the vertebra closer to the floor. Your pelvis will tilt back then. And you can use that way to initiate the movement as a way to move your pelvis and your head. So that when your lumbar vertebra come closer to the floor, your head tilts forward and your pelvis tilts back. In other words, the front of you is getting shorter. You're not tilting back. You're not tilting your pelvis forward. You're tilting your pelvis back and bringing your chin closer to your sternum. And notice that in order for you to be clear about this, you need to do a big movement. Do you feel that you need to do a big movement or a correct movement in order to do this? So let go of that effort. And begin to lengthen in your back so that your tailbone, your coccyx goes away from your occipital lobes in your skull. That's where near where your head is resting on the floor. And your nose and your chin come closer to your pubic bone. And by the way, do you inhale or exhale when you do this movement? And let that go and rest. Extend your legs. And then bend your knees. Put the soles of your feet on the floor. And now go back to tilting your pelvis back so this lumbar vertebra comes close to the floor and your head tilts forward so your chin comes closer to your sternum. But as you do that, inhale. The tendency will be to exhale when you do this, for most people, but do the opposite. Inhale and notice where your breath goes. Does it go more toward your lumbar vertebra? Does it go in toward between your shoulders? Who knows? And now let that go and just tilt your pelvis forward and back, and just see what you notice that happens in your spine and in your head. And open your mouth a little bit so that when your pelvis tilts back, your mouth will open a little bit more. So when your head tilts back, your mouth opens a little bit more. So your jaw, your mouth is open. Open your mouth. Open your mouth. And then when you tilt your head back, open your mouth a little bit more. So that when your pelvis tilts forward and your head rocks forward, your mouth closes a little bit more. And then let your mouth be neutral, and then just go back and forth with your pelvis. But this time, just allow your head to rock with your pelvis. Just let your head rock with your pelvis. And make that a light, quick movement, back and forth. You can make it even a bigger movement if you want. But if you make too big, you may not get a lot of benefit from that. And then as you're doing this oscillation, change where your attention goes and how you initiate the movement. Instead of initiating from your pelvis, shift your attention to your head. And then shift your attention to between your shoulders. And then shift your attention to how you're just sliding up and down between your shoulders. All you're moving is up and down. You're not even going into flexion extension. Your spine isn't necessarily even getting closer to the floor. It's just going up and down. And then initiate the movement by bringing your lumbar vertebra away from the floor and closer to the floor. Think of the lumbar vertebra. Back and forth. And then return to the pelvis. Rocking back and forth. And then bring your attention to your feet. So you're pulling yourself down and up with your feet. Lightly. And then slow that movement down so that you pace it with your breath. Where does your breath go? As you come down, your head comes down. You inhale. As you slide up, exhale. You exhale. And then let that go. Extend your legs and rest on your back. And just feel where your breath goes now. What's moving when you breathe? And then slowly roll to your side and come to sitting. And then notice how you're sitting. Notice how comfortable or easier it might be to sit on the floor, Indian style. And then bring yourself to standing. And feel your contact with the floor. You might want to find a place on the wood. It might be even more clear. And feel where your pelvis is in relation to your head. And notice your breath. Notice how the tendency after a lesson is to find yourself moving a little bit as you stand. And that concludes this lesson. You can find more lessons at Feldenkrais Method for Musicians on Facebook and at steveduke.net.